You may soon be promoted and fired by AI. Is that a good use of technology? Let's talk about it. So welcome to Dave is Not AI, the channel where we take a critical, no-nonsense look at artificial intelligence. I'm Dave Linthicum, an AI expert with over 30 years of experience in the enterprise AI field. I've authored or co-authored 17 books on technology topics. I have dozens of AI and cloud courses on LinkedIn Learning, and I'm a top AI influencer and thought leader. Let's get started. So I have some articles that talk about this in the description, and check those out. And what this is basically a general movement where employee management is being taken over by people who are using AI tools to do pretty significant things, whether to figure out if you're going to promote somebody, how much you're going to pay them, and if they should be fired. Obviously, lots of layoffs going on right now, normalization of the market, I guess, but it's going to be pretty disconcerting when people figure out that the reason that they were laid off was because an AI tool picked them. So a significant majority of U.S. managers, 66%, this is according to the article, rely on AI tools like large language models for making decisions regarding layoffs, promotions, and raises. And this highlights the increasing integration of technology into traditionally human-centric management processes. And so it's taking the humans out of it. So in other words, if they're making the decision in terms of whether you should be fired or not, they're not having to, step up and make the decision. They're just letting some sort of an automated process, in this case AI, making the decision for them. And obviously people who are going to be the victims of this are not going to be very happy with it. So the reliance on AI, such as critical decisions, suggests that many managers may not be fully engaged in understanding employee performance and contributions. And this is potentially leading to decisions that are going to lack human insight. And that's the core thing there. AI is a great tool, but I think if you take the human component out of it in making decisions like this, where it's going to affect somebody, in other words, they're going to be personally affected by this. This is pretty tragic for many folks who go through this. Maybe working, for the same company for, 15, 20 years, and suddenly they get called in the office and they're let go. That's going to happen from time to time, but those decisions should be made by humans, by executives, and considering all things in the context of why these decisions are being made. And I just think it's not necessarily a good use of AI. This is probably an instance where they're overusing this technology for things that it's really not meant to be used for. So obviously this has some ethical concerns in decision making. Managers' reliance on AI to make significant personnel decisions brings up some ethical questions. Yeah, of course, regarding accountability and fairness in the workplace. The lack of oversight can result in biased or flawed outcomes, reflecting data quality rather than employee merit. That's my biggest fear of this. At the end of the day, AI systems are only trained and they're only making decisions on the information that they're trained upon. And they don't know anything else out of those domains. And so in other words, loading things like employees metrics, productivity ratings, cost of time completion of projects, all these kinds of things may only tell a small part of the story. There may be a larger merit issue there, some extra extraordinary things that the employee did to separate him or herself in terms of their value in the workplace. And we're missing that if we're just looking at metrics. Even if you're working for things like a large consulting organization, they're going to rely on what they can rely on, basically a mathematical model in terms of how you're going to be ranked based on utilization, sales closed, things like that. In many cases, they're missing kind of the core component of the value of the employee itself. And I think that's going to, do not only the employees a disservice, but the company a disservice. You're going to be pushing people out of the organization that actually have a tremendous amount of value, where you could be keeping people that may not be as productive. And so, in other words, someone who's playing the game. As AI could be mirroring existing biases like LLM, it risks perpetuating discrimination, which undermines the principles of equal opportunity and fairness in hiring and promotion practices. So this is what it's going to come down to, is that these models, these AI models that people are leveraging, have innate biases. They all do. You can't eliminate them from being biased 100% of the time. You can't eliminate humans from being biased 100% of the time. And so the fear is these biases will be patterns that people don't anticipate. And we're making decisions based on these patterns, and they're incorrect patterns. In other words, we're not actually looking at the value of the employee. We're not actually looking at the value of the person who's going to be promoted. We're not actually looking at what the what the cost issues are in picking someone's salary. And missing lots of those pieces means you're only getting half the story, and you're going to be making bad decisions. So there's also a lack of training for managers that are using this technology. Just, despite the widespread use of AI and HR decisions, which is all that today, around 2/3 of the managers using these tools haven't received formal training in AI. The lack of expertise can lead to inappropriate reliance on technology without understanding its limitations and potential biases. So people are leveraging LLMs basically as a tool to get to making decisions. And in doing so, you have to understand the weaknesses and the benefits of using this technology. AI is, basically a tool, and in the hands of someone who knows how to use it, it's going to be very effective. In the hands of people who don't know how to use it, it can do a lot of damage. And I think this is the case where the latter is going to be true. So the absence of proper training will result in managers with diminishing their roles and responsibilities, eroding the fundamental people aspect of people management by treating AI output as infallible. And I'm seeing patterns like this as well. So in other words, everything has AI that's innate to every piece of technology out there. It always has a little stars on there where they've AI enabled it. In other words, they've hooked it up to an LLM because it's very easy to do. LLMs are able to use APIs. They just build them directly into the CRM software, the human relationship management software, the performance management software that these HR managers are using. And they believe that whatever response comes from this LLM is going to be gospel truth. In other words, it's going to be better than what they can do because it's able to consider, millions of parameters versus just a few parameters that we need to consider as humans. That's not necessarily the case. You can have an AI system that's making near perfect decisions, but is still not going to be able to gather and achieve the goals of what HR is there to do. HR is there to maximize human efficiency in people who are using and working at the company, and the ability to measure that is multidimensional. It's not going to be a single dimensional or even two dimensionals where you can AI model the system. You have to consider many other things besides the core metrics and data that the AI system was trained upon. So I have the legal issues as well. Relying exclusively on AI for promotions or termination raises legal concerns, of course, as organizations may become liable for discrimination claims if AI systems are found to exhibit a bias. And all of them are going to exhibit a bias one way or the other. And so you're not going to eliminate the bias. And so by having a bias in there, in other words, making unfair decisions, you're opening up the company to lawsuits, employer lawsuits, and typically those make the paper. They're bad PR, bad optics, and those are things that you don't want to have happen to you. Employers must ensure that AI tools comply with labor regulations and avoid the legal repercussions of doing that. And so they have to consider every law and every parameter that's out there. And in doing so, in making these decisions, I think in many cases, they're going to make decisions where people are going to test the AI system. I always tell my students in my AI architecture class, it's not a matter of when you're going to be involved in a lawsuit. It's just going to happen to you. In other words, it's going to be a foregone conclusion because AI over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be tested legally. If it's making very important decisions and we're outsourcing that to an automated framework, people are going to test the automated framework in court. And so in other words, they're going to question it. And we're going to have to answer a lot of questions around how these systems were built, how we manage bias. And I think in many cases, even the AI architects aren't ready to explain that yet. In many instances, they're surprised that people rely on the tools as much as they do. So the responsibility falls on the organizations to implement AI ethically and transparently, as failing to do so could lead to lawsuits, damage to the company's reputation, highlighting the need for governance and accountability frameworks in AI utilization. So there's a risk to doing this. In other words, there may be some sort of a productivity gain that you get from outsourcing many of the decisions you need to make as a human to some sort of an automated processes. But if you do that, you're going to have to accept the risk, making bad decisions, getting sued, and have to explain to courts and the employees how you came to the decision and why it was fair to do so. In many instances, I think these firings and layoffs are going to be undone. In other words, people are going to get pushed out of the organization. They're going to test it in court. They're going to figure out they relied too much on an automated AI process for making those decisions, and that was a flawed system, and they're going to be reversed. So there has to be a human element in management. I can't stress that enough. I've been working with AI for 30 years. I know what it's capable of doing. It's very advanced technology, very handy technology. But I also know when not to use it. So AI lacks the contents, empathy, and judgment that human managers possess, which are critical for making nuanced decisions regarding employee development and evaluation. You got to remember we're playing around with human lives here. And I understand there's a compartmentalization and dehumanization that occurs when people are making these decisions. I've laid people off before, changed entire organization as part of leadership in doing that. But the human component of that and taking everything into account, I think, is a responsibility of the humans that are leading those groups, those companies. So ignoring the human element can lead to poor morale among staff and decreased trust in management. I can't state that enough. In other words, if you do this, they're going to put a question after everything you do. They're not going to trust you. And, suddenly you laid off, say 10 people in a small company, and you're going to find that another 10 people leave. Because now they don't have trust in the system. If you just whacked my friends who are working at the company, you can easily do that to me. And so I'm going to find another position in a company where I can trust you. So if you're willing to lose some human resources and some trust, I think this is probably a good way to do it. So while AI can provide valuable data-driven insights, it's essential for human managers to apply this information thoughtfully, ensuring that the decisions made are compassionate, fair, and considerate of individual employee circumstances. So we can't teach an AI system to communicate with a human to figure out what's going on with that human. We can certainly feed it data and it can make decisions based on the data. Largely, that's not the way this stuff is done. I think that's the core assertion that I'm making here in this video. So I understand why it's tempting to take advantage of these tools, and certainly as they're being built into performance management systems, that people are using, and people are trying to find automation and best practices that it's responsibility of someone else besides themselves. And so by doing this, they're outsourcing many of the critical decisions that you have to make as a leader to some sort of an automated process, in this case, AI. That's absolutely unacceptable in my mind. You have to take responsibility for leadership. You have to take responsibility for the employees that are working for you, and you have to kind of conduct yourself as a human. So that's the best path to your success. And people are going to figure that out pretty quick. One thing we've talked about on this channel is people over relying on AI or putting too much stock into AI as being able to provide riches for the company, and it ends up backfiring on them because they don't understand the unintended consequences. And there are many here. Well, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out my other videos on this channel. Also, check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100+ LinkedIn learning courses, and of course, my generative AI architecture course out on Go Cloud Careers. And finally, my latest book, An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, stay very, very safe. Later.